A lot of the work that I do now involves going to a place where I have to alter reality. Either there are objects in the picture which have to be visually eliminated, or the light's all wrong, or you can't stay there till sunset, or something about that picture isn't the way that you want it. And over the last few years, I've learned how to look at the object that has to be photographed and mentally eliminate all the other elements in the picture and concentrate on the way that I want the final photograph to be. I know that real good athletes use this technique of visualization a lot. And if you read the sports pages and you read about world-class athletes, often they'll imagine how it would be when they're competing in a big event. And one of the things I've tried to train myself to do is to look at a situation and see it not the way that it is, but the way that I want it to be. And that often involves eliminating a whole lot of things that already exist in the room and adding in the elements that you want to add. Greg Heisler has a wonderful quote about it. He says that photography is 10% inspiration and 90% moving furniture. And I think that there's a whole lot of truth to this, that you think not the way that furniture is in the room because you know you're going to get rid of it, but first figure out, well, gee, what is it that we can do and what is it that I really want to do, and then go ahead and figure out, can I bring the technical elements to bear to actually make this photograph exist? The photograph today is a good example. The picture has to be done today because the airplane is only available today. And yet, in calling out to the airport a few minutes ago, the weather forecast is for at least overcast weather with a possibility of rain. Now, if it's a rainy day, we'll probably get washed out. But if the more likely possibility is if it's overcast and we don't have the ability of doing a wonderful sunset, we're going to have to go to an overcast situation and still make the photograph look almost as good as if it were a beautiful day with a lovely sunset and a rosy sky late in the day. So the first situation is to, in this case, to photograph the airplane, which is a new French airplane that's recently been imported into the United States called a Trinidad. And one of the most unique things about this aircraft is it has gull-wing doors, sort of like the old, there's an old model of the Mercedes, a 300 SL, that has big gull-wing doors that looks very much like it. So we want to try to emphasize the doors. And because of the translucence of the panels and the doors, I know that I want to try to shoot it as close to sunset as possible to emphasize that quality. And we will take a combination of available light and strobe and some gels and some filters and hopefully bring them all together and produce a photograph that will look good enough to satisfy the client and maybe even good enough to satisfy me. And it will involve elements of flash fill, straight photography, and probably a little bit of guesswork in between, and hopefully we'll come up with a nice solution. It's been a learning process, and I've gone on from doing straight photojournalism to other forms of photography, and now in the last few years I've been working really hard on learning good technique and have developed much more of a sense of craft about photography. Okay, George, let's put the gear just outside the airplane here. Thank you. I've become a big fan of the show Miami Vice, and I often find that it's a great show to watch with, you have to watch the show with color TV because it just doesn't work on black and white at all, unlike a program like let's say Dynasty or Dallas, where the production values are terrible. The shadows are hard and there's no attention to color or composition. If you watch Miami Vice on a color TV, which is the way it really has to be seen, they do wonderful, wonderful things with both pink and blue. and they draw you into the photograph or into the shot with a pink object, which is often in the foreground. And frequently they'll have a cool object in the background, which is generally blue. Even to the extent that consistently they repaint buildings, they change backgrounds, they dress the characters in some combination of pink and blue, and they do it over and over and over again, and yet I find that it never gets tiring. It continues to work. And one of the reasons it works is because they are complementary colors on the color wheel, and there are two sets of colors that work for you. And the warm light draws you in, the cool light creates a sense of depth. The film Das Boot, The Boat, that was popular about 2 or 3 years ago about a Nazi submarine in World War II, over and over and over again in this film, they used warm light in the foreground, cool light in the background to create a sense of depth. And as a still photographer, we can use the same kinds of techniques relatively easily. If you're working at sunset, you're already working into the blue part of the day. If you warm up the foreground with a little bit of warming light coming from either a tungsten source, which by itself is warm compared to daylight film, or a strobe source with an orange gel on it, and you balance it using a strobe meter with the cool light in the background as that light changes, this contrast between a warm foreground and a cool background gives a tremendous dynamic feeling to the photograph. And it works, and it's relatively simple to do, and if you practice it a couple times, it just gives a tremendous amount of depth and feeling to the photograph.